I hadn't realized how quiet my life had become until it screamed back at me in echoes. My name is Diane and I'm 54. I live alone in a modest suburban home, surrounded by too many reminders of days long past. My children are grown and gone, my husband, well, that chapter closed a decade ago. I wasn't bitter, but I wasn't exactly thriving either. My days had a rhythm. Wake up, read the paper, water the plants, and wander the grocery store aisles as if looking for something beyond groceries. It was a Tuesday, I remember that much. The air in the store was crisp, carrying the faint smell of bakery bread and produce mist. I was debating between two brands of coffee when I noticed him. Broad-shouldered, tousled brown hair, a crooked smile as he struggled to reach a jar on the top shelf. He must have been in his late 20s, early 30s, and he carried himself with an ease that made me feel self-conscious about my own awkward posture. "Need a hand?" I heard myself say, surprising even me. He turned, those green eyes lighting up. "Actually, yeah. These shelves weren't built for us average-height guys." I laughed, the sound unfamiliar in my throat. I grabbed the jar and handed it to him. His fingers brushed mine briefly, and for a fleeting second I felt something. "Thanks," he said, holding up the jar. "You just saved my spaghetti night." "It's a noble cause," I replied, smiling wider than I had in weeks. "Spaghetti needs heroes too," he quipped, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he introduced himself. "I'm Luke, by the way." "Diane," I said almost shyly. "Nice to meet you, Diane. I'll remember to call you next time I need a jar rescue," he joked before walking away, leaving me standing there, gripping my coffee, feeling more alive than I had in years. As I pushed my cart through the rest of the store, I couldn't help but glance at him whenever he crossed my path. His energy was magnetic, so casual, yet so assured. When I left the store that day, my bags were heavier, but my chest felt light. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what was missing. I was thinking about Luke. For days after that chance meeting, I found myself replaying the interaction in my head. It was ridiculous, really. A brief conversation in a grocery store shouldn't have lingered this long, yet it did. I kept wondering about Luke. Did he always shop there? What did he do for a living? Was he single? The last question made me laugh out loud in the solitude of my kitchen. "Diane, get a grip," I muttered to myself. I was old enough to be his mother. Whatever I felt was probably just the thrill of a random human connection in my otherwise monotonous world. And yet, the following Tuesday, I found myself lingering in the same aisle where we'd met. I wasn't proud of it, but I justified my behavior as harmless curiosity. I had no plans to speak to him again, only to confirm if he was real. When I didn't see him, I sighed and finished my shopping. But as I approached the checkout lanes, there he was, placing items on the conveyor belt. My heart skipped in a way that felt both exciting and absurd. "Diane," he called out when he saw me, his smile wide and genuine. He remembered my name. "Hi, Luke," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel my cheeks warming. "Looks like we're on the same grocery schedule," he joked, stepping aside so I could start unloading my cart behind him. "Or maybe we just have the same cravings on Tuesdays," I replied, earning a laugh from him. It was then I noticed he only had a few items. He'd probably finished checking out before I was even halfway through my cart. The thought of him leaving so soon made my chest tighten. "Hey," he said, his voice light, "I'm grabbing coffee at that little cafe next door. You should join me if you're not in a rush." I froze. Was he serious? I glanced at my cart, full of perishable items, but his green eyes sparkled with such warmth and sincerity that I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Sure," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was trembling. 5 minutes later, we were sitting at a corner table, him sipping a black coffee and me with my usual latte. Conversation flowed easily. He told me about his work as a graphic designer and his love for hiking, while I shared snippets of my life, carefully skirting around the heavier details. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're easy to talk to, Diane. Feels like I've known you for years." I didn't know how to respond. The honesty in his tone was disarming. I smiled and said, "Well, maybe we're just good at this Tuesday thing." When we finally parted, he waved with the same relaxed charm he carried in every movement. I drove home that day with a strange sense of lightness. That evening, as I unpacked my groceries, I realized something unexpected. I couldn't remember the last time I had looked forward to anything as much as I was already looking forward to next Tuesday. Tuesday came, and I didn't even have to convince myself to go grocery shopping. It was as if my feet were on autopilot, my heart carrying an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. Would he be there? Would he even remember our coffee? As I walked into the store, scanning the aisles with what I hoped was subtlety, I told myself not to get my hopes up. He had no obligation to be here, no reason to make this our thing. But then, as I rounded the corner to the produce section, there he was, leaning casually against a display of oranges, a grin spreading across his face when he saw me. "Diane," he said, his voice warm and welcoming, "you're late?" I laughed, shaking my head. "You're awfully presumptuous to think I'd show up at all." "True," he said, his grin widening. "But I had a feeling." That was the start of our weekly routine. Every Tuesday we'd bump into each other at the store, sometimes by chance, sometimes clearly waiting for the other to show up. We'd chat as we shopped, joking about our mutual love for overpriced organic fruit or debating which brand of pasta sauce was superior. Sometimes, we'd end our trips with coffee, lingering over our drinks as we shared pieces of our lives. He told me about his family, how he'd moved to the city for work and missed his younger sister, who was still in college. I told him about my garden, my passion for painting, and little anecdotes about the life I'd built over the years. I didn't mention the loneliness, though. That part of my life stayed tucked away, a quiet shadow I wasn't ready to share. What struck me most was how easily Luke made me laugh. His humor was sharp but never cruel, his stories full of energy and warmth. He had a way of making me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. One Tuesday, as we walked to the cafe, I asked him why groceries of all places. Surely there are more exciting ways to spend your time. He shrugged, his smile easy. "I guess I like the routine of it. Feels grounding, you know? And now," he added, glancing at me, "it's even better company." His words made my chest tighten, a warmth spreading through me that I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name yet. When we parted that day, I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me. The thought hit me with startling clarity. I looked forward to these Tuesdays more than I had looked forward to anything in years. And that scared me, because as much as I cherished our growing friendship, I couldn't ignore the little voice whispering in the back of my mind. "Be careful, Diane. You know how these things can end." The first flicker of something deeper hit me on an unassuming afternoon, while I was painting. My easel was set up by the window, sunlight spilling onto the canvas in golden streaks. I'd been working on a landscape, a quiet meadow with a hint of wildflowers in the distance. My brush hovered over the palette, poised to blend the next stroke of green, but my mind wasn't on the painting. It was on Luke. His laugh, low and unrestrained, echoed in my thoughts. The way he'd held a carton of eggs with mock seriousness, pretending to weigh them like gold. His warmth when he listened. His openness that invited me to share pieces of myself I thought were forgotten. I froze, the realization washing over me like a wave that knocked the air from my lungs. I wasn't just fond of him. I cared for him in a way that went beyond friendship. It felt ridiculous, even as the thoughts settled into my chest with the weight of undeniable truth. He was so young enough to be my son if I were being honest. And here I was, a 52-year-old woman, blushing like a schoolgirl at the thought of him. The brush slipped from my hand, landing with a faint splatter on the tarp beneath me. I stared at the painting, but the meadow seemed like a foreign place now. My emotions swirled too chaotically for me to focus. For the rest of the day, I couldn't escape it. My mind replayed every moment with Luke, now reframed under this new light. His kindness, his energy, the way he seemed to look at me like I was someone worth listening to. And then came the doubts, sharp and invasive. What would he think if he knew? Would he be disgusted, or worse, pity me? I couldn't bear the idea of ruining what we had with feelings I had no right to feel. I tried to rationalize it, to explain it away. He was just a charming young man with a good heart, and I was a woman who had spent too many years on the sidelines of her own life. Of course, I would be drawn to him, but that didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. Still, I avoided the mirror that evening. I didn't want to see myself. The wrinkles at the corners of my eyes, the gray streaks in my hair, the years that sat undeniably on my face. When Tuesday came around again, I nearly didn't go to the store. My heart felt too vulnerable, too raw. But staying home felt even worse, like admitting defeat to emotions I couldn't control. I ended up at the store anyway, my pulse quickening the moment I saw him near the bakery aisle. He waved, his smile as warm and genuine as ever. "Diane." Perfect timing, I was just about to grab coffee. "Join me." I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, and his smile faltered, concern flickering in his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's go." As we walked side by side, I tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of our conversations. But the truth was, every word, every glance, every laugh felt charged now, tinged with a longing I didn't know how to hide. And for the first time, I wondered if he noticed, if he felt it too. For days, the weight of my feelings clung to me, impossible to shake. I tried everything to distract myself. Extra long walks, more time in the garden, even reorganizing the kitchen cabinets. None of it worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Luke. His laughter, his easy charm, the way he made the world seem just a little brighter. And every time I opened them, the stark reality of my quiet, predictable life felt heavier. I knew I had to make a decision. I could keep seeing him, pretending my feelings didn't exist, or I could stop. But the idea of cutting him out of my life entirely left a hollow ache in my chest. It was late one evening, the house steeped in silence, when the thought came to me, invite him over. The idea startled me at first. It felt bold, too bold. What would he think? Would he find it strange, inappropriate even? But then another voice chimed in, quieter but more insistent. What if he says yes? What if this is your chance to deepen the connection you already feel? I tried to rationalize it. It was just a casual invitation, a neighborly gesture, really. He'd mentioned more than once that he loved homemade apple pie, and I'd promised him one after our last conversation. That's all it had to be. Still, as I stood in the kitchen the next morning, rolling out the pie crust, my hands trembled slightly. The act felt loaded with intention, even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. When I saw him at the store later that afternoon, my heart raced. He was standing by the produce section, examining a bunch of bananas like it was the most important decision in the world. "Luke," I called out, trying to sound casual. He turned, his face lighting up in that way that always made my stomach flip. "Diane." "Hey. How's it going?" I took a deep breath, clutching the list in my hand like it was a lifeline. "Good, actually. I made that apple pie I promised. Thought you might want to stop by and grab a slice later." His smile widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw something softer in his eyes, something that made my heart skip a beat. "Are you kidding? I'd love that. What time should I come by?" "Any time after 6, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Perfect. I'll be there." As he walked away, my mind raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I'd done it. I'd taken the first step. When 6 o'clock rolled around, I was ready. The house was clean, the pie sat cooling on the counter, and I'd even changed into a nicer blouse than usual. I told myself it was just a simple gesture, a neighborly favor, but deep down I knew it was more than that. And when the doorbell rang, my pulse quickened. This wasn't just about pie. It was about possibility, about stepping into the unknown and daring to hope for something I hadn't allowed myself to dream of in years. That I opened the door, my breath catching in my throat as I saw him standing there. Luke, smiling, holding a bottle of wine in one hand, looking like he belonged there, in that quiet space I had so carefully curated for myself. "Hi," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I thought I'd bring this as a little thank you." He held up the wine, and I found myself smiling at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm glad you could make it." He entered, taking in the familiar surroundings, his gaze lingering just a little longer on the details of my home than I expected. The soft hum of the overhead lights, the photos of my family scattered across the walls, the worn but cozy couch that had been a silent companion for so many years. "Everything smells amazing in here," he remarked, his eyes landing on the pie cooling on the counter. I felt a flicker of pride. "I hope it tastes as good as it smells." I gestured for him to sit, and he made himself comfortable on the couch, an easy, natural presence. I sat across from him, nervousness settling into my chest. This felt different from the other times we'd met, more intimate, more personal. The casual tone that had marked our past conversations no longer seemed to fit, and a quiet tension filled the space between us. "Want to dig in?" I asked, reaching for the pie. "I thought you'd never ask," he replied with a laugh, his eyes gleaming with mischief. As I cut the pie, serving him a generous slice, I realized how carefully I was watching him. The way he ate, casually, without pretension, and the way he spoke about his day, his dreams, his life. Everything seemed to hold my attention like never before. I noticed how his laughter rang through the room, how his hand brushed against mine as he reached for his wine. I was hyper-aware of every subtle shift, every fleeting glance. A moment of tension, a small spark that neither of us addressed. As we sat there, the evening stretching on with easy conversation and gentle laughter, I found myself wondering, could this be something real? Was there a space for someone like me in his world and his future? I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept creeping in. At one point, he stopped talking mid-sentence, his eyes searching mine in a way that made my heart skip. "Diane," he said quietly, his voice now serious, "I have to admit something." I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. This moment, this connection, was delicate, fragile. It could shatter if either of us said the wrong thing. "I really enjoy spending time with you," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "More than I thought I would. You're different. In a good way." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I didn't know how to respond at first, because the truth was, I felt the same way. But how could I? How could I admit that the simple kindness of a younger man had become something more than I was prepared to acknowledge? He leaned back slightly, watching me carefully, as if waiting for something. An answer, a sign, some indication that I felt the same. And in that moment, I realized I did. More than I ever expected. More than I ever thought I deserved. "I enjoy being with you too," I whispered, barely meeting his gaze. "More than I can explain." His smile softened, and there was a quiet understanding between us, a recognition of the moment we had just shared. It wasn't about age or expectations, or anything else that had clouded my mind for days. It was just about the two of us, sitting there, connected by something real and undeniable. I didn't know what would come of it. I didn't know if this could last or what it meant for both of us. But in that moment, I let myself believe in the possibility of more than I had ever allowed myself to dream. As the evening wore on, and the wine seemed to loosen the threads of my self-restraint, I began to reflect on what was happening between us. The warmth of his presence, the easy way our conversation flowed, the way my pulse quickened when his eyes met mine, it was all real, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't. But there was a part of me that hesitated, a part that questioned my place in this. What would people think? Would they judge us for the difference in our ages? Would they see me as desperate or foolish, chasing after something that couldn't possibly last? I wasn't a naive young girl. I had lived life, seen love, seen it fade and seen it break. I had been in relationships that had ended, some naturally, others with pain and regret. I had buried the dreams of romance long ago, buried them deep beneath the weight of routine and responsibility. But with Luke, there was something different. It wasn't just about the way he made me feel, alive, desired, seen, but also about the way he made me rethink my life. He reminded me of things I had forgotten. The thrill of curiosity, the joy of companionship, the possibility of being more than just the woman I had become. I caught myself staring at him again as he finished his wine, his face soft in the low light, his eyes glinting with laughter, with something more. There was a certain innocence to him, but also an undeniable maturity. He was still finding himself, and yet he seemed to have found something in me. Something that I didn't even know I had been searching for. "What's going on in that head of yours?" he asked, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I smiled softly. "Just thinking," I said, not sure how to explain. "It's funny how life works out, isn't it? You go so many years thinking you know exactly what you want, what you deserve, and then something unexpected comes along, and everything changes." He looked at me with that piercing gaze again, and I knew he understood. "Yeah," he said almost quietly. "Sometimes we find what we need, even when we didn't know we were looking for it." His words resonated deep inside me. That was exactly it. I hadn't known I was missing anything. Hadn't known I was longing for something until Luke had walked into my life. His energy, his youthful exuberance, his warmth, it was like a light had been flicked on in my heart. I reached out, placing my hand gently on his, a simple gesture, but one that felt monumental. "I don't know where this is going, Luke," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to ignore it. Not anymore." His fingers tightened around mine, a subtle but meaningful squeeze. "Neither do I." It was then that I knew. The age difference, the societal judgments, the uncertainties, they all felt so insignificant in the face of what we were creating together. We weren't bound by age, by time, by anything except what was unfolding in that moment between us. Love wasn't bound by years or decades. It was an energy, a connection, a spark that could ignite at any time, regardless of age or circumstance. And in that moment, I was no longer the woman defined by her age, by her past, by her quiet, predictable life. I was a woman who could still feel passion, still feel excitement, and still dream of a love that was uniquely her own. It didn't matter that he was younger. What mattered was that we were here, together, now. What mattered was that we could explore this connection, wherever it might lead. And if this was the beginning of something, then I was ready. Ready to embrace it without fear. I smiled at him then, truly smiling, and he returned the gesture with a warmth that made my heart race. "Let's see where this goes," I said, my voice steady, the words feeling like a promise to myself. One step at a time. The following weeks felt like a dream, a beautiful, unfolding story I never could have anticipated. Luke and I continued to spend time together, navigating the path that we had unexpectedly found ourselves on. There were moments of uncertainty, of course, moments when the weight of the world outside of us seemed to press down on me. I wondered if people would judge us, if they would think I was foolish, or that he was taking advantage of me. But those fears gradually faded with every passing day, replaced by the joy of being with him, the comfort of knowing that we shared something real. I began to realize that love wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And the beauty of this relationship, this connection, was that it wasn't defined by expectations or societal norms. We had found each other, not in spite of our differences but because of them. Our age gap was irrelevant to the bond we were forming. What mattered was how we made each other feel, the way our lives intersected in ways that didn't require explanations. There were still moments of doubt, still those fleeting thoughts about what others might think. But I began to shed those worries, embracing the love that was unfolding before me. Love had no age, no boundaries. It was a force that transcended time, something you couldn't control, only experience. And I was experiencing it in its purest, most genuine form with Luke. I thought about all the years I had spent in quiet resignation, waiting for life to happen to me, not realizing that life was already happening. I just hadn't been open to it. But now I was awake. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. I was learning that it was never too late to embrace passion, to feel desired, to experience love in all its raw beauty. Luke had given me that. He had given me a chance to rediscover myself, to rediscover what it felt like to truly connect with another person, to be seen and heard in ways I had long forgotten. And I was grateful, grateful not just for the romance, but for the rediscovery of my own worth, my own capacity to love. As we sat together one evening, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, I knew that love, in all its forms, would continue to shape our lives. And I would no longer shy away from it. Age didn't matter. Time didn't matter. What mattered was that we had found each other, and that we were willing to let this love grow, no matter where it led. "Are you happy?" Luke asked one evening, his voice soft, almost shy. I smiled, my heart swelling with emotion. "Yes," I said, my voice filled with certainty. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time. And I think I'm starting to understand that it's never too late to be loved." He leaned in and kissed me gently, his lips warm and reassuring. There was no need for words in that moment. We both knew that we were on a path together, one where love was our guide, our constant companion. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free to love, free to live, free to embrace the future that lay before us, whatever it might hold. Because love, I had learned, was not defined by age or time. It was defined by the connection between two souls, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.